Welcome to another of the Fortuna Admissions MBA Admissions Masterclass series. This is where, as your host, Matt Symonds, I get to sit down with my colleague of Dream Team, former admissions from all of the world's top business schools to gain their insights, expertise, advice, guidance to help you on each of the steps in the journey applying to your dream business schools. And we're starting this series looking at how to nail your MBA essays. Now, this is, of course, one of the aspects of the application that you very much have in your hands, under your control. Undergrad GPA is done and dusted. Perhaps you finished with your standardized test preparation, but this really is whether you get the chance to shape a deeply personal message about who you are, your background, the things that matter to you. So in the first of the series, we'll also in the coming weeks be covering the letters of recommendation and what others have to share about you and how that fits with the essays that we'll be discussing. And your resume, of course, all of those bullet points of accomplishments. How have you quantified those achievements? What are those fascinating aspects in the extracurriculars that you wanted to share with business schools? But it's all about the essays today. And of course, as one of the co-founders of Fortuna Admissions, I write about business education for many of the world's major media, and I draw much of my advice from our dream team. Today, I'm joined by Bill Kuza. Bill is one of the directors at Fortuna and was a former associate dean. He's also an alumnus of Chicago Booth. With him, Sharon Joyce, another of our senior expert coaches, and a former associate director of admissions at Berkeley Haas, and Scott Brownlee, again, one of the senior expert coaches, bringing all of his insights from the time that he spent as a senior admissions counselor at Wharton. And I'm sure Scott won't mind me mentioning, he actually has the credits for one of the Wharton essays. So we're going to try and cover a lot in the next 60 minutes. I will try to track your questions and weave them into the overall discussion. But in terms of what we're going to be looking for, that big picture about what the schools really hope to understand and learn about you from this opportunity to share your story in the essays. But before you jump into those essays, what is the planning? How do you think about the priorities, the different things that you really want to share, and as they fit in with the other parts of the admissions puzzle? We'll then be turning to some of those examples when Harvard asks, what more is there to know about you, or Stanford famously asking for 19 years, what matters most to you and why? We'll be keeping a track on that one because, of course, in the coming days, schools will be announcing the new essays for this year. There's every chance that Harvard Business School might be mixing things up under new admissions leadership and coming up with a new question. But a favorite is, of course, how to tackle your career goals post-MBA. What is that short-term and perhaps that longer-term vision that you have for the next steps of your personal and professional development? From there, motivation. Let's assume that you're highly, highly motivated to get into these dream schools. But what about alignment with a school culture? What are you actually going to then contribute to the wider business school community? Optional questions? Well, optional, there's an interesting word, and I'll be turning to our experts to find out how you should be using this rare opportunity to share additional details. And of course, some of the pitfalls that we want to make sure that you avoid. So I'm going to turn away from sharing the screen so that we can really focus on what everybody has to say. And I'm going to start with my colleague, Bill. And Bill, if you can start with just that big picture that we described, fundamentally, what are the schools looking for in the essays?
Well, thanks, Matt. From my standpoint, the schools are looking for 4 or 5 key things out of the essays. The first one is simply communication skills. How well do you write? And they're not expecting you to be the next coming of Shakespeare or even a J.K. Rowling, but they want to make sure that you can put together coherent sentences in a concise, logical, systematic way. So being able to be comfortable with the written word is an important element of being successful in business school. So they want to make sure that you can do that. A second piece that schools will be looking for is that you have a clear sense of your career direction. They want to know that you have a plan and that plan makes sense, that there's a rationale for going to business school and how that business school education is going to help you achieve your career goals. So being clear and upfront and focused on what your career goals are, very important part of the essays. Third is a clear understanding of their program. Do you have a sense that this program fits you. The curriculum, the educational approach, the philosophy, the types of students, the atmosphere are all conducive to your style of learning and where you want to go in your career. So doing the research to understand the schools and being able to demonstrate that you really understand what the school is all about is an important element of the essays as well. Fourth is evidence of the personal qualities that you will bring to the table. So talking a bit about your leadership abilities, your management skills, the experience you've had dealing and working with other people, your emotional quotient or EQ. What personal qualities do you bring that are going to contribute to the community that you're joining? And then finally, some of the essays will focus on what makes you you. What are the personality quirks that you might bring? What are the interests that you have? What's going to make you an interesting and fun person to be part of that class? And most schools want to make sure that you're going to fit in and be a contributing member of their programs. So all of those things are important elements of the essays. Clearly, not every essay will get at each of those. And in some schools, there may not be opportunities to touch on some of those aspects. But in general, those are kind of the broad pieces of the essay questions that you'll be expected to develop and clarify as you're doing your application.
Well, I'm still hoping, Bill, that one day I will run into J.K. Rowling's in a bookstore in Portugal. It hasn't happened yet, but do wonder if Harry Potter would be accepted into business schools, and maybe which one. If any of your viewers have an opinion on where Harry would secure offers. But Sharon, I'd just like to flip the question, because Bill has given us 5 or 6 pointers, these sort of key areas. But if I turn it around and say, okay, so what are the schools not looking for?
Oh, geez, not looking for trite responses. And I think though too, a lot of this goes into thinking about like, what do you need to think about before you even start drafting your essays? And there's really 2 flavors of essays, right? Like there are the pieces that are the more kind of mechanical about like, why do you want an MBA? Short-term goals, long-term goals, which I think we'll delve into a little bit. But there's also that whole piece about what makes you tick, what makes you unique. As Bill mentioned, like, why would we want to have you at our program? So I think in terms of thinking about what you need to do before you even start writing is researching your programs and also researching yourself, which always sounds kind of weird. And I know when I work with a lot of engineers and people in finance, they're like, what is this introspection piece that these schools want me to do? It seems very odd. Can't I just be cut and dried about what I want to go to school to do? And so I think sometimes people are we have some clients who are a little taken aback when they read this Haas essay, what makes me feel most alive when doing it and why? And so you just need to spend some time in some deep introspection with those questions that are a little bit more esoteric in terms of thinking about what makes you tick? What are some of your personal hobbies? What are your values? Things like that. And I think we all in some way, in terms of before you even start writing, you need to do a lot of brainstorming. I always encourage my client to take some of these more funky questions to your next dinner party. Throw that out, get some ideas out there, share them with friends. And sometimes your friends might even point out something about yourself that you hadn't even really had a recognition of. I also know with our clients at Fortuna, we have a really excellent curriculum to get people to start thinking about those self-reflection pieces that are going to be really valued in some of the different essays that you're asked to write for some of the top programs. So we take you through a whole leadership skills assessment. We take our clients through a whole career visioning workshop. And then with my clients, I also use a tool called Clifton Strengths to get at salient themes of talent, that emerge. And that also is sometimes things that we bring into our essay writing as well. So I think, again, there's those 2 flavors, the kind of understanding your motivation for why the MBA, as well as the more kind of flavorful getting to know you. And so again, I think with the self-reflection, sitting down and doing some bullet points about some broad things like, what kind of leadership do you aspire toward? Who do you most admire for their leadership? Think about a time where you struggled mightily for something and achieved it. Think about a time you struggled mightily for something and failed. So I think just through this self-reflection piece, writing those more kind of interpersonal essays will come more easily. And then I also think as you're researching schools, I think Matt, you said the word, or Bill said the word, the alignment piece though too, making sure that you are researching programs and before you start drafting essays, know about the different offerings at these schools and how you map toward them in terms of wanting to achieve short-term, long-term goals, academic goals, social emotional goals at the different programs where you are planning to apply.
Well, you talk about self-reflection and introspection, whether you're a banker, an engineer, a consultant, and of course at Fortuna, the emphasis that we place on really enjoying this rare opportunity to step back after, you were busy studying through undergrad, you've in those early stages of your career, putting in the hours, and then applying to business school and stepping back. Scott, as we think about that reflection, Harvard and Stanford have these, they seem like very open-ended questions. The current HBS question, what more should we know about you? And as I mentioned, for the GSB, what matters most to you and why? A question that they've asked now for over 19 years. How do you start to frame the thinking that might go into a question like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. So I'm going to package this in a couple different ideas, kind of similar to what Bill did. But I think it's really important, audience, to keep in mind that the key takeaways from me from what Bill and Sharon just said, that being interesting part is hard, right? There's ways to get at that, but then also researching yourself, right? So on that researching yourself front, something I really recommend is having what I call a kitchen sink approach to a kind of a maximal approach to your ideas for these open-ended essays. So try to think about your life. I also like to say, think about your life not like you're a novelist, and don't think about this exercise like you're an essayist or you have to like have a PhD in writing. Think of it like you're a screenwriter. We've all seen movies, right? Everyone's watched a movie, and movies have kind of high points and moments of maximum impact. And you want to think about times in your life when those points of maximum impact happen. They're going to be, a lot of times people think those are almost always negative, but they can be positive as well, right? You think about movies at the end when people get married, that's a positive, kind of really impactful moment, right? So, but I want you to start with a brainstormed list of all those different things. It'll be a kitchen sink and it'll be really maximal. So just to kind of visualize it, right? So like, even when I get ready to talk to y'all for a couple minutes, I'm getting all my ideas out on the page, right? I'm not going to share all of them with you because you wouldn't watch the webinar, but that idea of being maximal is really critical, because then you can take that maximal approach and then you can focus on the vignettes. Vignettes are just short, little quick stories that you're going to want to actually dramatize in your essays. You're not going to have room to pick everything, but if you start with everything, you're going to have your whole kind of palette of colors to work with. I think the other thing that's implicit in both the current Harvard open-ended essay and then the Stanford What Matters Most to You and Why essay is a secondary question. And that question is, so what? So when you're writing this essay, right, when I'm working with my clients, we answer the prompt completely. And at the end, I push them to answer at the end of their essay, the so what? So, okay, so what does this all add up to? And how does there a sense of inevitability that's been created with your experiences that ties to the school you're applying to, right? So we've talked about school fit, that's certainly important. The school, you can think of it like a person that you're going to have a relationship with, right? So where does that match up and where does that alignment live? And I think finally, just creating that sense of inevitability is really important, right? It's not to say that you're going to try to convince the AdCom in this essay of the specific reasons why you should be accepted and other people aren't, but more the sense of you've done X, Y, and Z, and then the next thing that needs to happen for you to get further on your career is A at that school, right? So I think that's really important. And we won't go into a lot of detail about Harvard's open-ended essay because we think it probably will change. But what I'll throw up just for everybody, so you have it as a reference in the YouTube chat, so you have it, is a link to Poets and Quants article about the recent 2+2 deferred MBA admissions questions. And we anticipate that the whatever final version of the Harvard essays that appears out in the ether here pretty soon will have some variants of those questions, particularly questions around leadership. And I think also this question around kind of depositing more than you would withdraw in communities that you've been a part of. So, and I'll pause there.
Well, I always saw you more as a Quentin Tarantino cinema goer, Scott. Now I know that there's a place in your life for romantic comedies. But I'd also like to pick up on a comment that Sharon made about career visioning, the very structured pieces. We're clearly missing a trick at Fortuna. We should be organizing more dinner parties. But Bill, sometimes perhaps candidates approach these essays more from the perspective, what does Chicago Booth want to hear? Or what am I expected to say for HBS or another school? How do you shape them away from that sense of what a school might want and bring them back to that deeply personal story that is uniquely theirs?
Well, and again, if we got into, common mistakes at the end here, one of those is trying to figure out what is the school looking for. And I always try to work with clients to say, let's come back to the story that you're telling. Think about what you're really trying to do in the entire application, really, which is, here's who I am. Here are the skills and the experiences I've had. Here is where I want to go. Here's where I want my career to take me. And here's how the MBA program is going to get me from where I have been to where I want to go. And as long as we continue to push the clients to think about that story, and to think about the elements of that and where they want to go and how the school fits into that, I think we can keep them away from what's the school want to hear and how do I kind of create that. So one of the things that I really want to focus on with most of my clients is, as you think about the motivation piece of the essay, how do you convince the admissions committee that this really makes sense for you? Is first to really understand your career goals. And I think a lot of clients come in thinking, I want to be X consultant, an investment banker, in private equity, in venture capital, whatever it might be. And I ask them first, well, why do you want to do that? And the answer is often, well, I have a friend and it looks really exciting, or I can make a lot of money, or everybody else is doing it. And I say, well, that's nice, and that may be true, and that may be motivating for you, but it's not motivating for the admissions committee to give you a yes answer. So think more deeply about why that career goal is important for you. What impact do you want to have? What problem do you want to solve? And why should the committee care if that's what you want to do? And how can the school then be a part of you becoming a successful alum, a successful person in whatever career you're going to undertake? So getting through multiple levels of the why. Why does this make sense to you? Why is it important for the world? Why does it help your community? A variety of ways that this motivation for getting an MBA can make sense is very important. And then conversely, on the other side is how does this particular school fit what you want to do? And how do you fit into that school? And that's coming back to something Sharon was talking about, is doing your research to understand the educational philosophy, the atmosphere, the culture of the school that you're joining or hoping to join. And a lot of that comes from talking to current students, talking to alumni, visiting the school if at all possible. And I recommend that for anybody who's thinking about schools. It's not always possible, but with technology these days, there are more and more options to do visits virtually. To really get a sense of what this school can do for you. And then in the essays, be able to take what you've learned about the school and suggest why that particular element of the school, whether it's the curriculum, the educational approach, case method versus lecture method, special programs, why those particular aspects of the school will help you get where you want to go in your career. So, in my case, for example, when I was applying to business school, I had never studied abroad as an undergrad for a variety of reasons, and I really wanted to go abroad. University of Chicago at the time had a wide range of study abroad programs as part of the MBA program. And that was important to me. And so I could talk about that in my essay when I was applying to school. So there was a great fit there, given what I wanted to do and how I wanted my career to go, my educational career, as well as my professional career. And the school had opportunities for me to do that. So tying the aspects of the school that are important to you to the things that you've either done or want to do in your career is a critical part of demonstrating that fit.
Right. Sharon, in your senior leadership role in admissions at Berkeley House, of course, you read countless thousands of applications, talk about business school, how it fits in those post-MBA career goals. Then you watched the intake year after year explore, make new friendships, discover new industries, and they could go in so many directions. Perhaps you could then frame career goals both as you're looking at it in the admissions office, but perhaps also how you might be bringing in viewpoints of colleagues in the career management center and saying, here's a candidate sharing these career goals and what they might think. So talk us through, take us behind the curtain, how you would then be looking at the career goals a candidate was sharing.
Let me say one thing though, too, before I jump into that. And I think my coaching colleagues would agree is I think sometimes when we're working with clients, and I think we're all saying this in different ways, but we really need you to think about what is something that the school needs to know versus something that would be nice for them to know. I think sometimes a big misstep is that you think that your essay is what gets you admitted. Your essays and your application are what get you invited to interview. And that's where you can sometimes bring in those nice to know things versus the need to know things. So I think sometimes people really struggle trying to figure out what are these kind of key elements that the schools must be able to discern and discover about me as they read my application essays and things like that. In terms of thinking about career goals, and I've also been on the career management side of an MBA program as well. And so I think that there's always this relationship of, are we bringing in a class that is also going to have great career outcomes at the end? And again, that word is alignment. So in terms of thinking about short-term goals, I think that part of the exploration piece for the client is making sure that they've actually thought about career pathways. What are jobs that will be achievable for them if they go to this particular business school program? You need to look at the school's career reports. At Berkeley Haas, we had set up times where admitted students could speak with our career counselors to be sure that before they joined our program, well before they came in, what are the career prospects for any given industry, ever given positions, things like that. And so making sure that there is alignment there. I would say, when I was reading applications, and we would always, invariably ask, depending on how it was phrased, but really getting at short-term and long-term goals. And I would say sometimes I would have some disappointment if it felt like this was a really generic essay that someone could have submitted to any program. Like, I want to know that we had great success with students interning with X organization. Our school has this amazing conference every year that is a great networking opportunity. I know alums, I'm thinking about doing something entrepreneurial. I want to pattern what I'm doing after what Priya, did with her career. And so I just think making sure that you have some specificity in terms of talking about short-term goals and also long-term goals as well. And I think kind of the big difference between articulating those short-term and long-term goals, again, are the short-term, are they things that are manageable, digestible for an admissions committee to believe that you will do and be successful at their program. And then I think with your long-term goals, I think this is where you can get visionary. You can talk more about the bigger impact you want to make, but it also does need to be grounded in reality. Is this something that I can achieve once I've gone through the curriculum, once I've leveraged the co-curriculars, once I've had a chance to tap into the community? And then I also do think sometimes too, you don't want to emphasize this first, right? Like, I remember reading applications of people who were just so excited to live in the Bay Area, and Berkeley felt like it was the secondary thought. I'm like, well, you can move to the Bay Area and not come to school here and still look for a job. But I think that if you are able to talk about what you would also want to exploit and leverage, in a specific geographical area, I think then that can also come into your essays as well, but it shouldn't be what you lead with. And so I just think, overall, just making sure that you demonstrate that what you want to do within like a 2 to 5 year period post-graduation. And then, after 5 years, after 10 years, after 15 years, what is the impact that you want to make on the world? I think all of the programs are really looking to bring in people who want to make a difference. And we're really on the precipice of meeting people who want to make a difference in so many different industries.
Right. Scott, we know that you like notes on a notepad, and I imagine 2 columns from what Sharon has said of the need to know and the nice to know, and how all of our viewers could start to complete those 2. But maybe again, you're drawing on your experience in admissions at Wharton. Sharon made the point of the essays don't get you in, but done right, they'll get you to interview. And so are there sometimes our clients say, well, is it too boring to say that I want to become a consultant? That seems like a very common post-MBA outcome. Or they talk about going from a product manager in tech to private equity, which is a heck of a transition. So talk us through perhaps some of the red flags, but just what will be grounded, coherent, and resonate with the admissions office.
Yeah, I can definitely talk about the flags. And like Sharon, I've been a career coach for MBA students as well at UT Austin in my case. And I think there are some career goals that are not necessarily impossible, but very hard to get to based on your given industry that lots of people will apply with. 50% of the people that I talk to, prospective clients of Fortuna, want to do venture capital or private equity because there's kind of a cachet with those. But the reality is that if you don't kind of work in those spaces beforehand, you're probably not going to matriculate into those roles short term, maybe long term, but not right away. And I think it's better to be your authentic self and think about the skills you already have professionally and how you're going to uniquely build upon those to make that next kind of inevitable, that shift that feels inevitable. So if you want to break into consulting, think about the experiences you've had that prepared you for that, being client facing, working on projects under tough deadlines, kind of leading from the middle within your organization, and paint a picture of why you would be somebody who could successfully recruit for that field, that industry right away on campus. I think a lot of times we kind of get stars in our eyes and we think about kind of the long term, what we want to do, instead of that short term goal being really feasible. And it's true that from a career coaching perspective, the schools want to feel like they're admitting you so that you'll have a good experience and you'll be happy with the outcome. A lot of times your earning potential short term is going to be higher if you kind of stay within a lane where you've built some expertise. That's not to say you're not going to switch maybe a function or a industry, but switching both, you're usually going to have kind of setbacks in terms of salary and things. And once you learn that, once you get into school, a lot of times you're more than happy to kind of readjust. But I think if you can be an informed applicant and talk to current students, we've said a lot about the importance of having conversations with kind of students that are having the experience you want to have right now. I think they will tell you usually pretty honestly, like, here's the reality of what ends up happening. So I think it's that kind of combo of those conversations, and then that realism where you're talking to people out in the market who have gone to that degree, and go on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's your friend. You can see what roles people are transitioning to. And the product manager from Microsoft isn't going into private equity, right? There's a reason. There's market realities at play separate from kind of that deep network and all the great career opportunities that schools will provide you. That's what I would say.
Well, I just, Bill, if you don't mind with our viewers, I'm just going to bring your personal story full circle because, of course, you sought out Chicago Booth for the international experience that you hadn't had in undergrad. And then in this illustrious career over more than 2 decades, took Chicago Booth out to the world, setting up campuses in the 4 corners of the world. So things really played out and how they began at business school. Having that deeper understanding of a school, Sharon mentioned earlier, I really want to feel that these essays are about my institution and couldn't just be broadly applied. Some candidates might take that too far. They look to memorize every stat, every data point that's on the website. So what is your advice to be able to capture things that are personally relevant to you and weave them into the story of where business school, and this business school in particular, fits with your journey?
So I always tell clients to start with the school's website and read through it carefully, and not to neglect things like the opening letter from the dean, as an example, because in a lot of cases, those overarching ideas will convey the things that are important to the school. So as an example, and the school I know best, obviously, is Chicago Booth. Chicago Booth in the dean's letter always talks about the Chicago approach to business education. And you'll find that phrase that goes throughout the website. Other schools have similar things. But understanding what that means is an important element of your application. And anybody applying to Booth needs to understand what the Chicago approach really means to decide whether that approach is appropriate for their particular learning style. And then the next thing I suggest is, again, they spend quite a bit of time talking to fellow students, particularly those students who have similar backgrounds or are thinking about the same kind of career direction. So my military clients, go get in touch with the Veterans Club, talk to them about what the school does for them, how the school works to support veterans. People that are interested in private equity, get in touch with the folks in the private equity club to figure out where did they come from? How easy is it going to be for me to make that switch? And so you want to personalize all of these elements. So getting a sense, talking to people, being able to say, I've chatted with 2 or 3 people that have similar backgrounds to mine. They have told me this about the school. They have highlighted these particular courses. They have talked about this particular co-curricular program. And here's how I personally, in my own journey can take those ideas, those courses, those faculty members, those co-curricular activities, and apply them to specific things I want to do in my career. As an example, let's take a another military client in the past. So he's interested in operations and getting to an operating role within a large company. He can take not only his experience in kind of managing other soldiers, but has learned about a particular class that focuses on operations and data analysis for effective operations. I can take that into this particular industry that I'm interested in, and it's going to help me be a better manager, better decision maker. So being able to apply particular aspects of a curriculum, particular aspects of a culture to what you want to do, gets you away from just kind of spouting off statistics and basically regurgitating the website that some people are prone to do.
Sharon, from your experience working with Rich Lyons when he was the dean at Berkeley Haas, you know, the 4 pillars: forever a student, challenging the status quo. But I wonder if sometimes the mottos of a school can be either distracting. If we take the GSB, and you've worked with many successful applicants to both these top schools on the West Coast, and they read, oh, change lives, change the world. What am I going to tell the admissions about how I'm going to change the world? Can they overthink those statements?
I think for sure. Although I must say, I am a card-carrying member of the 4 defining leadership principles. I still have this on my desk. Every day is reference. And it's very exciting too that the former Haas Dean is now going to be the chancellor of UC Berkeley starting in July. So that's pretty exciting news. But yes, I think sometimes people can go a little bit too far. I mean, I definitely remember reading essays at Haas where people would try to keep overusing phrases like, I always question the status quo. And when I questioned the status quo, and then I questioned the status quo. I mean, just take it down a little bit. But I do think it's important, obviously to understand that is for some of the schools, it is not just marketing fodder. Like they really are looking for students who have done more than just go to classes and get good grades, go more to, don't go to work every day and just come home and do nothing to kind of have a bigger give back. So I think you can sometimes overuse a little bit of trying to reflect back to the school. So I think that's why it's kind of great to work with a coach in terms of having a sounding board of like, okay, we need to just bring that down a notch. But I think though too, you really should be able to articulate though, why is sort of this mission or this vision of how this MBA program wants to present itself and its ethos, like why do those resonate with you in a very authentic manner? And, some schools might not even ask that so explicitly in some of the essay prompts, but later on, and I'm sure this will come up in one of our master classes about interviewing, you might have an alum that will say, hey, which of the 4 defining leadership principles resonates with you the most and why? And you better know what they are. And it's not a trick question, but I think just being aware of how the school is putting itself out there and why does that message resonate with you?
Right. Scott, Bill gave some great advice of reaching out to members of a particular club, whether that's professional or some personal affinity and things that you love and you're passionate about. I wonder if sometimes it's taken too far. For Harvard, this is not a popularity contest. You don't need to talk to 37 Harvard MBAs, but good luck trying to reach that many of them. Not all have the schedules to be able to respond. And I do wonder, when talking about the schools, if I fill paragraph 6, 7, 8 with the elective in interpersonal dynamics, there's touchy-feely, or a list of what electives, I'm thinking, yeah, but Matt could have cut and pasted those from the website and stuck them in the, is it really demonstrated? So how do you make that connection and show how a particular elective might fit with the professional transition you're looking to make, or equally reflect the contribution to Wharton or any of the other top schools?
It's a good question, Matt. I think when I work with clients and their brains are working, they like to focus on the classes because they're really concrete and kind of easy to kind of connect the dots. Like, I will take operations and be an operations leader as a former kind of military veteran. I think that the student clubs can be a little bit harder, but a good way to do that. And I think a lot of times what I tell people is the professional alignment is going to be pretty easy to establish, but the cultural alignment is actually a little bit harder. And that's where you can create separation between yourself and other candidates. So don't just, definitely you're going to need to reference professors and classes. There's an academic component to all these top schools. M7 schools expect you to draw that line. But on the personal side, the development side, like you might have a passion or hobby where there's a student club that's actually kind of grown and developed and flourished because somebody like you has a kind of a non-work interest that brought people together at the school. And I think you'll find that schools really want to build that community, right? The school is a community of communities. They want to feel like you're going to be somebody who's going to not just show up and get a great job, but create something that kind of lasts long term. And as Bill and Sharon were sharing, a question I wrote down was, what have you done for the school? I think that's a really good question to ask the alums you talk to, and to think about it and to try to reflect back to the school in your essays is, what am I going to do for you? And some schools make this very transparent, right? Like Wharton Essay 2 is basically like, how are you going to help Wharton? How are you going to give back? But I think that if you can implicitly bring the answer to that question out from outside of the classroom, you're going to be a really successful applicant, and you're going to stand out a little bit amongst your peers who, I think most people are pretty good at establishing the professional connection, right? Like I take these classes, I'll get that result, but it's those kind of relational social pieces that are harder for admissions committees to feel good about if you don't kind of do some convincing.
Right. Well, there you've made a mandatory question for any discussions that our viewers might have with alumni of the school. But sometimes on the application, Sharon, questions are framed as being optional. Now, you're already aware that you might have a 350-word limit over here, a 900-word limit on this particular essay, and suddenly this optional question pops up. Is it optional?
So let's though also kind of distinguish between, there's like two flavors of optional questions. There are optional questions that are really space for you to talk about any sort of what an admissions committee might look at as a red flag, or some sort of missteps, talking about any sort of poor grades that you might have had, big gaps in work experience, things like that. And so those are sort of the optional essays that get at kind of any sort of academic aberration, any sort of supplemental coursework. And with those, I think, definitely put yourself in the shoes of an admissions committee member. If there's something that they would have a question about, like, what did you do during that 4-month employment gap on your resume? I clearly see it. So you absolutely want to use that to explain things. When you explain things, particularly if it was grade stumbling blocks or maybe not performing well on one of the GMAT sittings, you don't want to get too in the weeds. You don't want to make excuses. I think you really just want to talk about what happened and how have I shown improvement when applicable. For example, if I have a client who might have not done so well in some of their mathematics courses, they might want to talk about that, but they also want to say, but since graduating, I've taken MBA math, I have taken these courses at work, I have sought out projects that really pushed me to flex, my quantitative muscles, things like that. And so that's kind of one form of sort of this optional essay. So if you have something that an admissions committee might wonder about and why aren't you explaining it, you definitely should take advantage of using that type of optional essay. There's also schools like Stanford, we keep picking on Stanford today, but they have, a couple different optional ways of sharing more. I know one of the prompts is talking about elaborating on your background and life experiences that you have that might have shaped some choices or actions that you've had. My thought is, and my colleagues can correct me if they feel differently, but I feel like if you're given the opportunity to say more, you should definitely take advantage of it, because by and large, most of the other applicants in the pool absolutely are going to take advantage of these optional essays. The ones that are more of the flavor of tell us more about you and about your life experiences. And when I was thinking about kind of that particular prompt for Stanford, like for sure, I have had clients who have used that to be able to talk more about something that is of great interest to them, but based upon something in the background. So for example, I had a student who was a first-gen college student, and that was a really unique experience for them, having landed at an Ivy League college, and having a very dissimilar upbringing from some of their close classmates. And so using that experience later to become very involved with with an organization that helps support other first-gen students on their pathway to college I also had a client who always was very enterprising, but they had, a pretty standard engineering role. And so they took the opportunity when a friend was trying to start a bespoke watch company to jump on board and do some things part-time to really show their enterprising spirit, their entrepreneurial spirit. And so using those types of optional prompts, I think, can be a great way to just give the admissions committee a little bit more insight into, your hobbies, your passions. And so definitely take advantage of those as well. Like I said, I mean, my kind of philosophy is if you do have an opportunity to say more and it's relevant, and it will also help bolster some pieces in your application, you do want to take advantage of that. Certainly, though, if you don't have extenuating circumstances, things like that, don't use that essay, because then it starts to look like overkill, and or it looks like you might not know how to follow directions.
Yeah, I'm going to bring in what you mentioned earlier, Sharon, about introspection and self-reflection, because from the comments from all three of you, I'm just reminded of the relationships that we have with our clients at Fortuna and this journey that we share together, holding up a mirror, exploring first gen, going to an elite university, what was the environment like? And taking them perhaps to corners of their lives that either they didn't think was relevant for the application to business school, but how you're then helping them to explore some of the themes, the characteristics that emerge. So before we end the webinar, I'd like to come back to all three of you, as we have, about 12 weeks before round one deadlines in the 2024-25 admission cycle, and how individuals can really start to plan and dig that extra level. But before I do, I'd like to turn to you, Bill, because again, you've seen so many applications, both working at Booth and working with clients at Fortuna. Some of those common mistakes, the pitfalls that they could have avoided. What sort of things do you see that could otherwise have been avoided?
Right. I think you've heard a lot of those in our conversation to date, but let me highlight a few that I see regularly. The first one is trying to sound smart, trying to use big words in your essays, trying to use a bit of puffery, and typically you want to be able to, you want the admissions committee to be able to read the essays in a coherent fashion. And as soon as you start using big words and are going to the thesaurus regularly to try to find a bigger or better word for something, it's awkward, it sounds terrible, and admissions committees say he's just trying to, sound smart. So avoid that. Use common, reasonable language. Again, and that'll differ a little bit depending on everybody's writing style, but don't try to be something you're not. Second thing is parroting the website. We've already talked a bit about that. It's not simply about pulling bits off the website and popping them into your essay. Here are the statistics here. I want to come to your school because you have a 37% hit rate on private equity or whatever it might be. So parroting the website, not a good idea. The more difficult one, and one that I work with clients a lot on, is, again, coming back to the why of your career goal and people forgetting the why. So having a rationale for why this career goal is important to you and why it makes sense and how the MBA program is going to help you get there. Too often clients get to the point of, I want to do private equity, and I think it'd be great fun, and the school's going to provide, some good foundations for that. But then I continually ask, well, why do you want to do private equity? What is it about that field that attracts you? And oftentimes they'll forget that. So we have to push them to make that happen. Third or fourth, I guess, is cutting and pasting from one essay to another. There are a lot of essays out there that seem similar, Booth to Wharton, lots of career goal kinds of related things. But there's a danger in trying to shoehorn one school's essay into another school's essay question. There are some similarities. You can learn a lot from doing one school before you go to another. But schools also know what the questions are at the other schools as well. So they can tell whether you're just kind of grabbing an essay whole cloth and putting it into their particular application. So be wary of that. Fourth, I see a lot of clients who try to name drop. And they'll say, oh, I know I have met at a seminar many, many years ago, somebody was on the board of trustees at school X. Should I mention that I know that person? And my general answer is no, that's not helpful. If you've talked to recent alums and current students about particular aspects of the school, certainly mention that you talked to them and here's what they said about the program and why that makes you excited about going there. But just because somebody's got a big name or big title, not important. And then finally, is not answering the question. There are some questions out there. I've had clients who try to get everything in, even though it's not really addressing the question. So if a school is kind of talking about what makes you feel alive, as an example, you don't then kind of bring in and here's what courses I want to take at the school, just because I didn't have a chance to say that somewhere else. So be cognizant of the question that's being asked and focus on that. And in most cases, you have a lot of flexibility around there, but I've had some clients who kind of bring in extraneous ideas because I haven't had a place to talk about that anywhere else yet. Well, in that case, the school isn't really all that concerned about it. So those are some things that I have seen and deal with pretty regularly.
Sharon, Bill started with one of, don't try to sound smart by using big words. What about sounding real? Because of course, people will be thinking, well, hey, now we've got ChatGPT and other AI tools. It'll be grammatically correct, and there we go. But what would it miss, do you think, if you asked artificial intelligence to write the essays for you?
It has a head, but it doesn't have a heart. It was funny. I did I think that it was the Times had a quiz of reading 10 essays, and I detected 8 of the 10 that were written by ChatGPT. I was really hoping for a 10 out of 10, but some were a little sneaky. But I think that it can be use it for what it is. It's a tool. It can help maybe generate some ideas, but for sure, I think it's pretty detectable because it's missing kind of the soul, right? And honestly, Matt, I think that if you are so reticent to do the introspection that some of the schools require, that school might not be a good fit for you anyway. And so you might be happy elsewhere if that just fundamentally is something that is not an activity that you want to be engaged in.
Yeah. So Scott, finally, any other pitfalls that you should avoid? But as we think about the next 3 months and all of that research and introspection, discussions that you can have with members of clubs and second-year students, just talk us through why people aren't going to just start by jumping into the essays. There are all of these other pieces to put in place first that will perhaps lead to a deeper, a more meaningful discussion in the essay.
Certainly, Matt. And I saw we had a Q&A question. Sony asked, what is something that applicants don't realize is special or valuable enough to mention in the essays that the admission officers actually care a lot about? So I'm going to actually frame my answer in terms of Sony's question. I thought it was a good question. I think that my big piece of advice as you start this journey is to be really reflective and maximal and to focus on and think a lot about failure. Because I think when we apply to business school, we only think about our success and we worry like, does my success measure up against other people's? I think you'll find actually candidate to candidate that most people have some nice success, right? But it's actually the failures that define us and shape us and make us who we are and also make us memorable. And I would encourage you to think about failures in your life as potential topics for your essays and potential vignettes that you share with schools. Now, you may not share them in all cases. Like Bill makes a great point. Like a business school doesn't ask a question, they probably don't necessarily need you to tell them about it. But I think, Sony, to your question, I think a lot of times people think that mistakes they have made or times where they have failed, or times when they have had negative outcomes are off the table, when really they're actually on the table. And my most beautiful, wonderful client essays of all time have been essays that kind of rooted in like a failure or a difficulty that they faced and kind of came out the other side of. So I think before you actually start answering the career questions, all these other things, like think about failure and think about how that shaped you uniquely. And I think you'll be well on your way to differentiating yourself from not only the AI version of yourself with the essay, but also I think other candidates who maybe haven't gotten the advice to kind of start there.
Another great question and a very interesting word choice from AJ Sharon, picks up on the idea of sharing maybe the things didn't work out the way they did, but it was a great learning experience. Talking about vulnerability. Now, how would you define vulnerability in the framework of an admissions essay?
Oh gosh, I think getting back to what Scott said, like not being afraid to talk about a time where you mightily worked towards something, but it didn't come together. But what did you learn from that experience? I had, to piggyback a little bit on what Bill was talking about working with a military client, you think of very stoic, keep a stiff upper lip, things like that. And he was thrust into a situation where members of his company had died. And so how could he show emotional and empathetic leadership in that moment, knowing that the mission mattered, but the people mattered more? So I think thinking about situations where you can show empathetic leadership, where you can show that you have leadership skills that are kind of the hard skills, right? You know, I have these analytical abilities, I have these quantitative abilities, but I also bring compassion to the workplace. I also want to be aware of the diversity within workplaces. Like, how have I shown that I'm welcoming of a variety of perspectives, of ideas? So I think those are ways that you can show kind of your softer skills. And I don't really even like the word softer skills. I mean, I just think they are skills, right? So I think that schools, by and large, I think are also putting a big premium, a big emphasis on people who are aware of their empathetic leadership skills as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, from product managers at Microsoft to individuals that have lost members of their battalion, all three of you have also, worked with clients across such a diverse spectrum of experience. It's the reminder of why essays are so deeply personal. And I know that the sort of questions and discussions that you engage with, it requires a lot of trust, a lot of openness. Which is one of the reasons at Fortuna that we start with a conversation so that we can get to meet you, you can get to meet us, and really get that sense of the chemistry. So today, this session has all been focusing on essays. And as I start to think back over the last 55 minutes, myriad examples and actionable steps for all of you to then think about and how you can use that in the coming 3 months for your applications. This, as we said, was the first of 3 masterclasses that we're running through the month of June. Next up, next week, same time, we'll be thinking about those other individuals that themselves can go beyond bullet points on the resume and share insights and perspectives about you, the recommenders. Who might you choose? What is it that they can share? And again, it picks up on today's discussion, all these pieces of the puzzle, and how what they share about perhaps your outstanding contributions and impact can then weave and sit in a very coherent way with what you share in your essays. And then the following week, we'll be looking at those bullet points on a resume, but all the way down. No one is limited to a job title. There's so much more that you can reveal and share with the admissions office. And of course, the application forms themselves. We could have perhaps folded today's session about essays to certain aspects of the application forms. There are a lot of open essay questions in there. But again, I'll be drawing on the expertise and insider insights of the team. So it was a wonderful opportunity to have Bill, to have Sharon, and to have Scott with us today. They are part of this dream team that I keep describing, that all worked inside the world's top business schools, and therefore, bring this level of insight to their work with clients that are successfully applying to their dream schools. It starts with a conversation, and it's a free consultation. We take it very seriously. We will look through your resume, perhaps share some questions before we get on Zoom together to discuss with you. And we hope that and the outcomes of that will give you some great next steps to take. So thank you to everybody for joining us, particularly thank you to Sharon, to Bill, and to Scott for a great session today.